with Banks for a long period of time, right?
He couldn't even tell you, like, at any point when you speak to him what a problem is. I put him like where I put Marquise.
You and Banks are not hanging out at the strip club.
50 Cent takes some responsibility for Lloyd Banks and Tony Ayo.
What responsibility? Like a parent?
You're the leader.
What responsibility am I taking from? Like, explain to me.
That you didn't encourage them to be independent sooner.
That's not true.
Lloyd Banks is finally speaking out about what really happened between him and 50 Cent. And this time, he's directly addressing the years of disrespect, the lies, and the way 50's been rewriting their history. G-Unit was one of the strongest movements in hip-hop when it dropped. And 50 was the face, of course. But Banks brought the bars. His voice, his delivery, his lyricism, they gave the crew real weight. They were brothers. Or at least, that's what we thought. But after the fame hit, something changed. 50 started taking shots at Banks in interviews, calling him lazy, saying he didn't want success bad enough. He even clowned him in his book, talking like Banks had just given up on himself. And at the time, Banks stayed quiet. No social media rants. No clapbacks. Until now. In a recent interview, Banks finally broke his silence, and it's clear he's done letting 50 control the narrative. He said 50 wasn't there for him during the hardest parts of his life, and that the lazy label wasn't just wrong. It was disrespectful. And maybe the most messed up part, Banks was still putting in work the entire time, just not in the way 50 expected. But 50, being 50, didn't take that lightly. He fired right back, throwing more shade at Lloyd. So what really happened? How did the G-Unit bond get this toxic? And who's really telling the truth, 50 or Lloyd? Let's get into it.
The guy has Lazy Lloyd tattooed on his arm. He literally wears his laziness on his sleeve. He's always projected an unhelpful mixture of being both introverted and cocky at the same time.
For years, Lloyd Banks kept his mouth shut about his fallout with 50 Cent. However, after 50 recently took a shot at him, completely unprovoked, Lloyd decided to set the record straight. During a recent stop on his tour, 50 Cent name-dropped Lloyd and Young Buck in a behind-the-scenes video posted on Instagram, and it sounded like he was throwing shade at Lloyd's lack of success. And see, this is the main difference between 50 and Lloyd. Lloyd doesn't do social media. He doesn't get petty in interviews or throw random jabs at 50. But in a rare interview, he was finally asked about his relationship with 50, and this time, he addressed everything. The rumors, the disrespect, the lazy narrative 50's been pushing for over a decade. And you could tell, he wasn't just airing out old beef. This was personal. Banks said it straight up, he wasn't lazy, he was grieving. Around the time 50 was calling him unmotivated, Banks had just lost his father. He was going through real-life pain, and instead of support, he got thrown under the bus publicly. And not just once, repeatedly. Interviews, books, memes, 50 turned it into a whole campaign. Interview. And while 50 acknowledged that Lloyd is a decent lyricist, he said Lloyd simply doesn't have the natural charisma or the work ethic to be a star.
So, Banks' temperament was definitely a little crazy. I'm not saying anything here that I haven't said to Banks directly. Another time I sat down with him, just when IG was starting to pop off, and tried to drop this gem on him. You gotta get on Instagram, I encouraged him. You can be a little awkward in person, so this is actually a better way for you to communicate with people. Nah, I don't want to do what he said. Why not? You can literally put punchlines under your pictures, make some new fans. Nah, that's corny, he told me. When Banks made that comment to me, I realized he had gone as far as he can go. In fact, my exact thought was, this is someone I can't invest another minute or...
However, according to Banks, 50 was never really there for him, not during the low points, and not when it truly mattered. And that hit deeper than any diss track. Lloyd also pushed back on the idea that he fell off. Since 2021, Banks has dropped 3 full albums as part of the course of the Inevitable series. Yeah, there were no radio singles and no major label push, but it was raw bars and consistency. And if you've been paying attention, Banks never stopped rapping. He just stopped playing the industry game. And that's the root of it all. Banks isn't the kind of artist 50 wanted him to be. He's not flashy, not obsessed with visibility, and definitely not about chasing viral moments. He's a rapper's rapper, focused on the craft, not the clout. But that's also what made 50 turn on him in the first place. Because in 50's world, if you're not helping the empire grow, you're dead weight. And Banks? He wasn't trying to be a soldier anymore. Now, to give you some context on how this all started, Banks, 50, and Tony Yayo came up together in South Jamaica, Queens. These weren't industry-made relationships, they were neighborhood kids trying to make it out, using music as their way up. And when 50 blew up with Get Rich or Die Trying, he brought his people with him. G-Unit wasn't just a crew, it was a brand and a lifestyle. Banks was the standout when it came to bars. 50 had the hooks and charisma, but Banks had that cold delivery and sharp wordplay. Fans respected him for it. His mixtape work was legendary. Money in the Bank, the Cold Corner series, all of it. Then in 2004, he dropped The Hunger for More. That album went platinum in less than a month. On Fire was a hit. Karma, I'm So Fly, all classic Banks. At that point, it looked like the whole G-Unit empire was rising together. You had 50 running the charts, Banks solidifying himself as a serious MC, Yayo doing his thing, and later on, Young Buck and Game. They were everywhere: music, clothing lines, Reebok deals, video games. The chemistry looked unshakable. And Banks wasn't just riding the wave, he was helping build it. His voice and energy helped shape the sound. Even 50 would admit early on that Banks was one of the best pure rappers in the crew. But fame complicates everything. As the years went on, cracks started to show. Buck got kicked out. Game went rogue. G-Unit as a group began to lose steam. And through all that, Banks started pulling back. Now, we all know Banks was never the loudest in the room, but eventually, he was barely in the room at all. The fallout wasn't loud or messy, but the distance between 50 and Banks became obvious. After the early G-Unit wave, the energy shifted. The group stopped moving like a tight unit and started looking more like individual acts under shared brand. According to 50, so much mess happened between them that there's zero chance they'll ever reunite. What happened is that Banks pulled back from the spotlight. He stopped doing press, stopped showing up at 50's events. And to fans, it looked like he just didn't care anymore. But behind the scenes, things were more complicated. Meanwhile, 50 started doing interviews where he threw light shade at Banks, still pushing the lazy narrative. He claimed he did everything in his power to push Lloyd, but said Banks wasn't hungry enough, didn't want to evolve, and didn't understand the business side of the game. Interview. In one interview, 50 said Banks had the talent but no hustle. He also criticized him for refusing to go on social media. But see, Banks wanted to stay quiet. That's just his personality. He kept to himself and worked in the background. He wasn't into industry politics, and he didn't care about playing the visibility game. To some fans, that made him real. But to 50, it made him a liability. Then came Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter. In the book, 50 took it to another level, saying both Banks and Yayo were stuck in the past and refused to adapt. He called Banks out by name, saying he was too comfortable and didn't want to grow. Basically, he painted him as a talented but wasted opportunity, someone who could have been huge, but let it all slip.
I haven't had communication with Banks for a long period of time, right?
He couldn't even tell you, like, at any point when you speak to him what the problem is. I put him, like, where I put Marquise.
You and Banks are not hanging out at a strip club,
No, he goes though.
but you don't go.
No, I don't see me there. We went to Atlantic City. We was in it was a showcase. They expect a show to happen tonight. Yeah, like, yeah, we will see you at the show tonight. And I go, oh, they expecting a show. Like, I was like, yo, call all of them, tell them to come here. When I asked Banks, like, when you go to perform your shows, you don't do this song? Like, this is the hardest record on your. And he's like, why? Because you won? I looked at it and I was like, trying to understand where he was coming from. He had been on my last record. He's like, I ain't been on your record, this and that. And I was like, so what? You don't have to be on none of my records. Like, me being on your records is the favor. I put you on a record with Eminem on my first album, fool. Don't nobody even know you. We were anticipating success, not as much success as we actually had. Mm-hmm. And it would have been sufficient if we had half the success.
This book was the first time 50 publicly put that much distance between himself and Banks. And while Banks said nothing publicly, fans believe he addressed the fallout in his song Stranger Things. This is exactly where Lloyd and 50 disagree. Lloyd feels he's in the perfect spot, and to him, being super famous doesn't define success. Instead, success is being able to do something you love and provide for your family. Plus, Lloyd already acknowledged his laziness the moment he got the Lazy Lloyd tattoo. He's even admitted it in interviews where 50 has made those remarks about him. Interview. So Lloyd doesn't deny that he's a laid-back type of guy, but it's not just about being lazy. Lloyd simply doesn't want to be part of all the other mess that comes with being an artist. He wants to make music and let it speak for itself. However, 50 saw it as a lack of ambition. But there's another issue here. 50 has made it clear that loyalty is his number one rule, and anyone who steps out of line gets cut off quick. In fact, 50 said in his book that he'd rather be held at gunpoint than be betrayed.
Banks was around 14 years old when Biggie and Pac were both popping. So that makes sense that they still resonate with him so deeply. I can relate. I still love the music from when I was that age too. The difference is I haven't patterned my career after KRS-One and Cool G Rap. What would be the point of that? They were both incredible in their moment. But I've always been concerned about creating my own moment rather than copying theirs. Years ago, I told Banks to film a video of his life and post it on YouTube. Introduce people to his lifestyle. Let the camera follow him around for a while and see how he moves. Maybe something he says or does will create a spark, go viral, and then he'll have some heat around him again. What I didn't want him to do was sit there writing punchline after punchline and then grow resentful when no one seemed to care about his mixtapes anymore. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Before adding Biggie and Pac didn't do that. They're dead, my man, I told him. They died before this stuff was even invented. And how do you know they wouldn't be posting on IG if they were alive? It was a line of thinking that really blew my mind. It suggested that if Tupac was alive, he'd still be wearing leather vests and red bandanas tied around his head, sending girls his beeper number. Or that Biggie would still be wearing Gucci sweaters and playing Mortal Kombat 2 every night. In Banks' case, a lot of his failure to grow as an artist is connected to his emotional composition. Banks grew up in the same neighborhood as me, but was never a part of it in the same way. I actually hustled with his father. Banks was more content staying on his porch and watching the world from there. There's nothing wrong with that, but it underscored a particular aspect of his personality. Banks wanted things to come to him, as opposed to going out and getting them for himself. That's not me trying to assassinate his character. The guy has Lazy Lloyd tattooed on his arm. He literally wears his laziness on his sleeve. He's always projected an unhelpful mixture of being both introverted and cocky at the same time. The kind of person most comfortable being a big fish in a small pond. If Banks was hanging out in the studio with a bunch of unknown MCs, he'd be very confident. He'd enjoy being the center of attention. But if I suddenly showed up, he'd feel like he got demoted. He'd be bitter. He didn't feel like the center of attention anymore. I get it. I can take up a lot of the air in the room. The problem is that he'd never fight to get some of that oxygen back, which is exactly what a star is supposed to do. I believe a true star must possess 4 fundamental abilities: create great material, be a high-energy live performer, have a unique appearance, and possess a strong personality. Tupac had all 4. So does Mary J. Blige, Chris Brown too. If I'm being honest in evaluating Banks, he possesses maybe one of those qualities.
And the way he explained it, he basically feels that he gives his all to his people and is even ready to put his life on the line for them. So when those same people stab him in the back for 50, that's worse than death. Lloyd Banks is finally speaking out about what really happened between him and 50 Cent. And this time, he's directly addressing the years of disrespect, the lies, and the way 50's been rewriting their history. G-Unit was one of the strongest movements in hip-hop when it dropped. And 50 was the face, of course. But Banks brought the bars. His voice, his delivery, his lyricism, they gave the crew real weight. They were brothers. Or at least, that's what we thought. But after the fame hit, something changed. 50 started taking shots at Banks in interviews, calling him lazy, saying he didn't want success bad enough. He even clowned him in his book, talking like Banks had just given up on himself. And at the time, Banks stayed quiet. No social media rants. No clapbacks. Until now. In a recent interview, Banks finally broke his silence, and it's clear he's done letting 50 control the narrative. He said 50 wasn't there for him during the hardest parts of his life, and that the lazy label wasn't just wrong, it was disrespectful. And maybe the most messed up part, Banks was still putting in work the entire time, just not in the way 50 expected. But 50, being 50, didn't take that lightly. He fired right back, throwing more shade at Lloyd. So what really happened? How did the G-Unit bond get this toxic? And who's really telling the truth, 50 or Lloyd? Let's get into it.
Be robbed at gunpoint, then be betrayed. Not that I suggest you try it. At least getting robbed is exciting. There's an undeniable rush when somebody pulls out their piece and growls, "Get on the fucking floor." Once it's over, provided you don't get shot, you can go tell your friends, "Yo, they just stuck me up." Your pockets might be lighter, but you'll be much stronger overall. having survived the experience. Getting betrayed is different. You don't get a great war story out of it. I've never heard anyone get hyped telling their friends, yo, you won't believe this, but I just got backstabbed by my mans. There are no stripes earned for that shit. When you open yourself up to someone, either financially or emotionally, and they go left on you, it's a different kind of pain, even more dramatic than a stick-up kid physically taking something from you. Like Malcolm X said, to me, the thing that is worse than death is betrayal. You see, I can conceive death, but I could not.
Years, Lloyd Banks kept his mouth shut about his fallout with 50 Cent. However, after 50 recently took a shot at him, completely unprovoked, Lloyd decided to set the record straight. During a recent stop on his tour, 50 Cent name-dropped Lloyd and Young Buck in a behind-the-scenes video posted on Instagram, and it sounded like he was throwing shade at Lloyd's lack of success. And see, this is the main difference between 50 and Lloyd. Lloyd doesn't do social media. He doesn't get petty in interviews or throw random jabs at 50. But in a rare interview, he was finally asked about his relationship with 50, and this time, he addressed everything. The rumors,
Because I find betrayal so painful, I put incredible thought and consideration into the people who surround me. As I detailed in this chapter, when I was first coming up, I made a mistake of confusing loyalty and location. It's a miscalculation a lot of people make, wanting to believe that just because someone is from the same streets as you, that they're gonna have your back forever. I learned the hard way that that's not the case. I think everyone's a little afraid of being too trustful, but I'm definitely worse than most. In my life, I feel like I've been betrayed by people I deserve better from. People I've given money to, opportunities to, love to, even life to. Because of that, for a long time, the only thing I had faith in was money. I only trusted the paper that says, "In God we trust." This is one of the reasons the theme of betrayal is so prominent in my show Power. It's an issue that's always on my mind, so much so that I even called the last season the final betrayal.